Welcome to Time Nexus. I am so incredibly glad you're here today. In this explainer, we're going to figure out exactly how ancient Rome built, and maybe more importantly, how they managed to maintain the biggest and absolute most complex empire in human history. And hey, just to be clear up front, we aren't doing this for your next school assignment or some stuffy academic study. My entire goal with this channel is to break down a real, fascinating history for all the people. We aren't just going to memorize dates and battles today. Instead, we're going to tear open the hood and look at the actual raw mechanical gears of power that allowed one single city to completely dominate the known world for over 1,000 years. Get ready, because the systems they invented, they are literally still running your life today. Let's dive right into this by looking at just one single number: 80,000. To really comprehend the sheer mind-boggling scale of their domain, you have to realize that the Romans constructed a massive, interconnected network of paved roads that was over 80,000 kilometers long. Just to put that into perspective for you, that is enough paved road to wrap around the Earth's equator twice. No way, right? But it's true. And it wasn't just about moving troops around, though that was a big part of it. This network created a totally new reality for geography. For the very first time in human history, you could start out in the heart of Italy, hop on a road, stay on it, and end up deep in Spain or Greece. It completely rewired how humanity thought about distance, travel, and global connectivity. All right, let's set the stage with a quick look at the rise of Rome. Before we crack open the three primary engines of their unmatched power, we really need to understand their evolution. You see, their government wasn't just some static thing. It constantly evolved. They actually started out in the period of kings, which was essentially just a standard monarchy. But by 510 BC, they booted those kings right out and formed the Republic, which was ruled by elected senators representing the upper classes. But the real shift, the transformation into the absolute juggernaut we recognize today, happened after decades of brutal civil war. That ended in 31 BC when Augustus took power, birthing imperial Rome. And it was during this imperial phase that their borders just absolutely exploded outward across the map. Which brings us to Engine 1, the ultimate war machine. The very first great engine of Roman dominance actually wasn't just battlefield courage, though they had plenty of that. It was the ruthless, highly systematic evolution of their military. The Roman war machine was unlike anything the world had ever seen before. Now, we naturally picture these perfectly uniform, heavily armored legionaries marching in absolute lockstep. It's the classic movie image, right? But initially, Rome's army was nothing like this. They actually relied on a temporary citizen militia. It was basically just property-owning farmers who were called up to fight seasonal conflicts. And the moment the fighting was done, they went right back to their plows. It was effective for local scuffles for sure, but you definitely can't conquer the entire world with a bunch of part-time soldiers. So the absolutely crucial turning point is this monumental shift that happened in 107 BCE. A consul named Gaius Marius looked at this clunky system and completely rewrote the rulebook. It was a total game changer. He completely eliminated the property requirements for service, which threw the doors wide open to poorer, landless citizens. This transformed the military almost overnight, from a seasonal amateur militia into a permanent, highly trained professional standing army. He standardized their weapons, unified their training regimens, and turned fighting for Rome into a full-time, lethal career. But Marius and the leaders who followed him didn't just stop at handing guys identical swords. They essentially invented modern military logistics from scratch. Just consider some of these unbelievable innovations. The Cursus Publicus was a massive, highly organized state-run supply chain distribution network. They built what they called horia, which were these massive, fortified, state-run warehouses strategically placed all over the map just to hold provisions. They even invented valutedaria, which were fully functional, portable field hospitals used to treat the wounded right there on the front lines. All of this meant they could sustain punishing, long-term military campaigns literally years away from home, slowly bleeding their enemies dry through sheer, unrelenting logistical superiority. To give you an idea of just how fanatical they were about protecting their supply lines, listen to this incredible story about Gaius Marius. During a grinding campaign against the Cimbri, his vital supply ships were struggling to navigate the incredibly muddy, slow-moving mouth of the Rhone River. Now, did Marius just sit back and wait for the mud to clear? No way. His logistics were so relentlessly efficient that he ordered his battle-hardened troops to drop their weapons, pick up shovels, and physically dig a massive diversionary canal right off the river just to speed up his ship's deliveries. It was called the Fossa Mariana, and it perfectly proves that Rome won its wars with shovels just as much as it did with swords. Let's shift gears to Engine 2, engineering as imperial power. Moving beyond the literal battlefield, we start to see how Rome utilized brilliant, unprecedented engineering as a very literal form of psychological warfare. Let me ask you a question. When you observe the massive, towering arches of a Roman aqueduct, like the famous one built to channel water 15 kilometers from a mountain spring directly to the relatively small Spanish town of Segovia, you really have to ask yourself, is this level of extravagance actually necessary? I mean, think about it. Do you really need a towering multi-story stone monument just to bring a basic municipal water supply to a small provincial town? The answer, as historians will quickly point out, is that these massive structures weren't just about practical plumbing. This was entirely about making Roman power completely permanent. These soaring aqueducts, massive amphitheaters, and endless straight roads were permanent, in-your-face symbols. They were specifically designed to mentally dominate conquered landscapes. Just imagine being a member of a local tribe. You look up and see mountains being physically pierced and rivers being entirely rerouted by massive stone arches. The psychological message they were sending was crystal clear. Rome is here, Rome is totally unstoppable, and Rome is forever. And this brilliantly illustrates just how deeply they ingrained their branding into the very earth itself. Even taking a simple walk in the provinces was a masterclass in experiencing imperial power. All along those 80,000 kilometers of roads we talked about, they placed these heavy stone milestones exactly every 1.5 kilometers, which was 1 Roman mile. And what was written on them? Usually a massive, imposing engraving of the current emperor's name, so you knew exactly who to thank for your smooth journey, along with the precise distance to the next staging point. For the very first time in history, people could place themselves precisely on a global map, and that map belonged entirely to Rome.
Moving right along to Engine 3, the prize of citizenship.
Now, steel, concrete, and psychological intimidation cannot independently control millions of wildly diverse people stretching across 3 different continents. It's just not sustainable. Rome needed a cultural tool to make people actually want to be part of the machine. Being a civis Romanus, or a Roman citizen, was that ultimate prize in the ancient world. It wasn't just a fancy title. It was a deeply desired, fiercely protected legal status that offered real, tangible chances for upward social mobility. In an incredibly brutal ancient world, it guaranteed you certain unbreakable legal rights, a steady package of benefits, and a degree of equality under the law. Suddenly, your ethnic origin or your conquered past didn't have to dictate your destiny forever. If you became a citizen, you were officially part of the club.
To truly understand how incredibly valuable this status was, just look at the year 91 BC. This status was so critical that Rome's own Italian allies, the very people who fought side by side with the legions, actually launched a massive, bloody rebellion called the Social War. And here's the crazy part. They didn't rebel to destroy Rome or break away. They rebelled because they felt completely humiliated by being denied Roman rights. They effectively fought an entire war screaming at the capital, tax us, draft us, but make us citizens. It was a massive wake-up call for the Roman Senate. So let's see how they took this concept and built it into an undeniable system of control. Rome definitely learned its lesson from the Social War and effectively weaponized the concept of citizenship. Here was their brilliant 4-step playbook. First, conquer a territory. Second, recruit the fierce local warriors from that territory into their auxiliary forces, carefully separating them from their homelands to prevent uprisings. Third, and here's the absolute genius part, promise them that if they survive 25 years of grueling military service, they get to retire with full Roman citizenship for them and all their heirs. Step 4, you instantly secure absolute long-term generational loyalty from non-citizens, who are now willingly fighting for the very empire that conquered them. You can see the stunning results of this brilliant assimilation strategy in places like Timgad, which is a sprawling city built right in the absolute middle of the African desert by Emperor Trajan around 100 AD. Looking at these massive ruins today, you realize that dozens of nations around the Mediterranean willingly accepted Roman domination. And why wouldn't they? The exchange rate was wealth, security, and unprecedented civic inclusion. They bought into the idea of Rome because Rome offered a clear, structured path right to the top of society. So what happened? Let's take a look at the fall and legacy. So if they possessed an invincible, highly trained army, permanent psychological infrastructure, and brilliant cultural systems, how in the world did this massive machine finally break? Well, the answer really lies in the sheer math of their success. As the centuries passed, their grand strategy fundamentally had to shift.
They moved from a period of concentrated, highly offensive expansion, where they could mass their legions together and completely smash enemies, to an absolute nightmare of late defense. By the later centuries, they were frantically trying to defend a grueling 10,200-kilometer perimeter. Leaders like Diocletian were practically forced to take those legendary, massive legions and fragment them into smaller, localized units just to constantly plug holes on the frontier. The unstoppable offensive juggernaut simply became a stretched, cracking defensive wall.
The inevitable unraveling of this empire happened in agonizing stages. In AD 117, they hit their maximum territorial extent. But by AD 286, the sheer logistical burden of running everything was so impossibly heavy that they literally had to split the empire into the east and the west just to try and manage it all. Plagued by vicious internal power struggles, crippling economic inflation, and an army that was now relying heavily on Germanic barbarian recruits who didn't really have any loyalty to the grand idea of Rome, the core finally fractured. It all culminated in the devastating, historic fall of the Western Empire in 476 AD. Yet, here is the really fascinating part. While the emperors vanished into history and the borders completely dissolved, the DNA of their systems never actually died. It just evolved. The foundational concepts of our modern global supply chains, from standardizing equipment across continents to the concept of total global connectivity through transport infrastructure, right down to the fundamental principles of supply chain visibility and massive inventory management, these were literally pioneered by Roman legions. Today's enterprise resource planning software and complex transportation management systems, they are really just the digital descendants of the cursus publicus and the Horea. The Romans engineered a system of power, cultural assimilation, and military logistics so terrifyingly robust that its organizational and architectural echoes remain completely visible to us thousands of years later. When you stand in front of the sweeping arches of the Colosseum or walk down a perfectly straight paved road somewhere in Europe, you aren't just looking at old, dead stones. You are looking at the remnants of a perfectly calculated, world-altering machine of human organization. Which leaves us here, at the end of our explainer, with a truly fascinating question for you to ponder. The next time you pull out your phone to track a package being delivered across the globe in just 2 days, or you drive down a massive modern highway cutting right through a mountain, ask yourself this. When we look at the immense logistics and infrastructure driving our modern society today, how much of it is actually our own modern invention, and how much of it is simply a ghost of the ancient Roman machine? Thanks so much for joining me today on Time Nexus. Stay curious and keep questioning the history that surrounds us every single day.